Hey, so once again, leaving the gym and the news is on. And let's see here. They have CNN, Fox News, some other stuff going on. I'm kind of like a sports channel, whatever. And first, I'm looking at CNN, and because I'm on one machine, and they bring up the H5N1 scare, which is the bird flu. So apparently, they found more bird flu in batches of raw milk. Okay. So go to the other thing, then there's Fox News. And Fox News is kind of this barrage, like of just one after other, of just kind of really no, absolutely no, not really even stories, just kind of grievances and just bitching. They're bitching about a trans player playing volleyball in California. They're bitching about how the Democrats are bitching about losing. They're bitching about how DEI is things that really have no material effect on 99.9% of Americans. And even the things where the way they do characterize it, it's kind of misinformed. Like, for example, the whole thing with the DEI. Most I'll just say this. Here are the people who've benefited the most from diversity efforts and affirmative action. White women. Look at the studies. White women have benefited the most from affirmative action programs. And once again, if we look at in large, white women will vote against their own interests. But I digress from my point. I want to focus on the H1N5 thing. So this is a weird view of this, but hear me out. So also on Fox News, which made me think of this, they're showing advertising for one of their shows, The Saints, which is directed, I think it's produced or maybe directed by Martin Scorsese, which is kind of funny because about 30 years ago, he made the film adaptation of The Last Temptation of Christ, in which he got death threats for. And the same people who would probably threaten to end his life over him making that movie are now watching his series on The Saints, which I'm not going to lie, it looked kind of interesting. Never seen The Last Temptation of Christ, did read it, but anyway. So kind of weird thoughts here. Just kind of, I guess, bring it all together. Let's look at the Bible as a metaphor, and specifically, let's look at the Old Testament as a metaphor. And people turn away from God in various moments in the Old Testament, and God punishes them. Humanity turns away from God, there's a flood. A city turns away from God, two cities turn away from God, they're firebombed. Let's look at it as pure metaphor, because we really, as much as people think that's going to happen, I can feel pretty confident there's not going to be any cities firebombed or any great floods, delusion, I can't remember that word, but great floods or whatever, nothing like that. But what I can do is I can see how this virus, this H1N5 virus, can possibly jump to humans. That's the big fear, by the way. It started out with birds. It's being found in cows. And now the big fear is that if it were to jump from cows to humans, because the way viruses work, they forever mutate. And at one point, they're able to mutate in such a way that they can kill us. And the closer and closer they move, if you have a zoological virus, the closer and closer it moves to a human, the more likely it is to be able to jump to us. Basically, that's how HIV started. It was a simian immunodeficiency virus, and they believe that humans are out killing probably some primates, maybe monkeys, in the field, cleaning their meat, eating them, and the virus jumped to us. Maybe the fear is cows are closer to us. They're mammals. So, in conflation with this, it's interesting that it's popping up in raw milk, because the person who may be in charge of the NIH is a big fan of drinking raw milk. You don't know what raw milk is? It's milk that hasn't been treated by pasteurization, a process that we've known about for, I think, centuries, over a century. Whenever I think Louis Pasteur was born in the 1800s. I don't know. Honestly, I think RFK, who's pro raw milk, I think he has a thing against just everything about Louis Pasteur, because he's against vaccines and pasteurization. And Louis Pasteur created the first rabies vaccine, so maybe he just has a beef with Louis Pasteur. But what does this have to do with the whole the floods and everything? Well, let's suppose, as a metaphor, that the one thing I think we can all agree on, I think one thing that non-believers and believers can agree on is that human beings have something that other animals, and we are animals. Now I know the believers may not go in that, but we're animals and we're mammals. But the one thing that does make us exceptional is our ability to how we process the world, the level of sentience we have. We know that other animals have some sense of self-awareness, however you define it, but being able to kind of mold the world to fit you, to be able to adapt to the world. But the big thing is being able to come up with science. We have that. So when we move away from science, right? When we move away from reasoning, and we kind of build it up with this kind of pseudo reasoning, because no one is going to say that they're unreasonable or illogical. Human beings in general aren't necessarily rational creatures, but we're rationalizing creatures. So you'll have people who say, well, I've done my research and I've looked things up. And you really haven't, because the world's really complex, and the only people who can really do the research effectively are the people who've spent years and years doing the research. But when we turn away from these things, there's consequences. When we turn away from reasoning and science and I'm not holding up the process of science like it's some type of priestly manner, which is something that a lot of religious people do. They equate it. They say, well, you believe in science. Well, it's not a matter of believing in science. It's a matter of saying we have observations and having, I guess you could say you believe in the process, but even believing in the process, you know that there are, you know that there are certain limitations to the process. As I point out, I'm not a scientist, but I am a mathematician, and one thing we do learn is the process of reasoning and logic. So at this point, like one thing, and to kind of wrap this up, one thing that's being considered is moving away from the study of infectious diseases and focusing on chronic disease. That's something that I think Robert F. Kennedy wants to do, which isn't a bad thing, to put more time looking at chronic diseases, but to sit there and say, well, not only are we moving away from infectious diseases, but practices that we've had for infectious diseases for generations, we're kind of moving away from. Less people are getting vaccines. We probably find out people aren't washing their hands as much. It's like we're regressing. And even if you look at the comment section, if this video gets more than 50 views, which I don't know, it probably won't, I'll probably have at least a third of people sitting there saying how I'm sheeple or the viruses or big pharma or some type of thing. And everything they're saying is kind of like everything they say is usually it's dumb. Like even the whole thing of like, well, I'll address one thing like the whole big pharma with the virus. Well, there's with the vaccines. Well, there's a guy who created an open source vaccine that he was going to profit from. But that's not the point. Because it's not the point. None of this is the point. I don't even know what the point is anymore with these discussions. But I do know this, is that if this virus mutates, and I know this because I believe the people who say this, all right? Because just like I believe the people who design my car and it works, and I believe the people who design the power grid because they're electricians, I believe people who are experts in their field, who have a certain expertise in their field, and maybe it's just the hubris of having a terminal degree, but knowing the process. There's nothing magical about it. There's nothing mystical about it, because I've undergone the process myself of just becoming, proficient in a particular field. But I believe that when they say that H1N5 can be deadlier than the corona, I believe it. When they say it, I believe it. Because, and by the way, what's going to happen? If these things do happen, they'll point to all the people who predicted it was going to happen and say it's some type of conspiracy. Well, let's put it like this. Maybe we should paint it like this, guys. You're being punished because you moved away from science, and now God is punishing you. Maybe if you put it like that, these people will be willing to get a vaccine. But I highly doubt it.